Okay, so we're diving into some biopharmaceutics today. You sent over this textbook, Biopharm 4 to 6.pdf. It's pretty dense, but we're going to try to break it down.
Yeah, definitely.
And we're focusing on chapter 12,
Okay.
which is all about drug elimination. So basically, how our bodies get rid of medications.
Exactly. It's a fascinating process and surprisingly complex.
Hmm.
You take a pill and assume it just does its thing.
Right, right.
But the journey that drug takes through your body, it's like an epic adventure.
Yeah, and I think people will be surprised to learn just how much is involved. So are you ready to unpack this?
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, great. So the textbook jumps right into the liver. Like it's the main player when it comes to drug metabolism.
Yes, for sure. The liver is like the body's detox center, constantly filtering and processing everything that enters the bloodstream.
But I was surprised to read that other tissues play a part too, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the liver is definitely the star of the show, but it's not a solo act.
Yeah, like the adrenal gland. According to this table 12 to 1 in the text, it's got almost as much of that enzyme, cytochrome P450, as the liver. That blew my mind. I had no idea.
It's amazing, right? It just goes to show how interconnected everything is. And when it comes to the liver, its structure is perfectly designed for this whole detoxification process.
So how does it actually work? Like I'm picturing this big filter, but I'm guessing it's way more complex than that.
You're right. It's not just a simple filter. It's more like a highly sophisticated processing plant.
Okay.
The liver is full of these tiny units called lobules. And within each lobule, there are these little channels called sinusoids. And the blood flows through these sinusoids
Okay.
and comes into contact with these amazing cells called hepatocytes, which are the workhorses of the liver. They're the ones doing all the heavy lifting when it comes to breaking down drugs.
So it's all about maximizing that contact between the blood and those liver cells.
Exactly. And the liver also has these Kupffer cells, which are like the cleanup crew. They engulf and destroy any bacteria or debris that might be lurking around.
So the liver's filtering the blood, breaking down those drugs. But how? What's the actual process?
It's called biotransformation. Basically, the liver takes those drug molecules and transforms them into something that can be easily eliminated from the body.
Okay.
And this happens in two main phases. Phase I is all about prepping those molecules for removal. It's like exposing or modifying them, making them more water-soluble so they can be excreted in the urine.
So phase I is kind of like roughing them up a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of these phase I reactions involve those cytochrome P450 enzymes we talked about earlier.
Right, the ones the adrenal gland has too.
Exactly. And there's not just one cytochrome P450 enzyme, by the way. It's actually a whole family of enzymes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, each with its own specialty. Then comes phase II, where the liver really gets to work tagging these molecules for removal.
So this is where that return to sender label gets slapped on.
That's a great way to put it. These phase II reactions are called conjugation reactions. Yeah. Basically, the liver attaches another molecule to the drug, making it even more water-soluble and easier for the body to excrete.
So break it down, then tag it for removal. Makes sense. But what happens to those broken down pieces, those metabolites? Are they always harmless?
Ah, that's where things get interesting. Sometimes those metabolites are inactive, just harmless waste products, but other times they can actually be the active form of the drug. And in some cases, they can even be toxic.
Hold on. So you're saying a drug can transform into something totally different inside the body? That's wild.
Yeah, it is. And it all depends on the specific drug and the individual person.
Wow, this is already way more complex than I thought. What are some examples of how these metabolites can be different?
Well, a good example is prodrugs. Have you heard of those?
I don't think so.
Prodrugs are basically medications that are inactive until they're metabolized. So they're like a delivery system. The textbook talks about levodopa, which is used to treat Parkinson's disease. It's actually inactive until it reaches the brain and is converted into dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter that's lacking in Parkinson's patients.
So the body is basically activating the drug right where it needs to be.
Exactly. Pretty clever.
Very clever. But with all this complexity, I can't help but wonder how much individual variation there is. Like, do our bodies all process these drugs the same way?
That's a great question, and it's something the textbook really emphasizes. There's a lot of individual variation in drug metabolism, and that's where things get even more fascinating.
So what are some of those factors that can cause these variations?
Oh, there's so many. Yeah. Genetics, age, diet, other medications you might be taking, even your gut bacteria can play a role.
Wow, so it's not just about the drug itself, but about how our individual bodies are processing it.
Exactly. And This is why understanding those individual variations is so crucial for personalized medicine. It's about tailoring treatments to each person's unique needs.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those individual variations. The textbook mentions this thing called acetylation.
Oh yeah, acetylation is a great example. It's a type of phase 2 conjugation reaction, remember, where the liver attaches another molecule to the drug to tag it for removal.
Right, right.
Well, it turns out that people can be either slow or fast acetylators.
Slow or fast? What does that mean?
It all comes down to variations in our genes. There's an enzyme called N-acetyltransferase that's responsible for this acetylation process.
Okay.
And some people have a gene that makes them produce a less active form of this enzyme, which means they metabolize certain drugs more slowly. They're the slow acetylators.
And other people have the gene for the more active enzyme, so they're the fast acetylators.
You got it. And this can have a big impact on how someone responds to a medication. The textbook uses the example of isoniazid, a drug used to treat tuberculosis.
Isoniazid, okay.
Yeah. For slow acetylators, this drug can build up in their system and cause serious side effects. But for fast acetylators, it's processed much more quickly, and they're less likely to have problems.
So doctors can actually use this knowledge to tailor treatment.
Absolutely. By knowing someone's acetylation status, they can adjust the dosage accordingly to minimize the risk of side effects.
Wow, so our genes are literally influencing how our bodies handle medications. That's incredible.
It really is. And it highlights why understanding those individual variations is so important.
Okay, so we've got genes playing a role. What else can affect how our bodies process these drugs?
Well, the textbook also talks about this really important molecule called glutathione. Have you heard of it?
Glutathione. It sounds familiar, but I can't quite place it.
It's a powerful antioxidant. It's like the body's own defense system against those cellular troublemakers.
Oh, right, the reactive intermediates.
You got it. Glutathione basically neutralizes those harmful substances by conjugating with them, attaching itself to them and making them harmless.
So it's like the body's own cleanup crew.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Glutathione's capacity is limited. It can only handle so much at a time.
And what happens if it gets overwhelmed?
Well, that's when things can go wrong. The textbook is the example of acetaminophen.
Acetaminophen. That's just Tylenol, right?
Yeah, exactly. At normal doses, acetaminophen is perfectly safe. But if you take a really high dose, it can actually overwhelm your glutathione reserves.
Seriously?
Yeah, and when that happens, those toxic metabolites can build up and damage the liver.
Wow, I had no idea about that. So even over-the-counter medications can be dangerous if you're not careful.
That's right. It's important to always follow the recommended dosage and be aware of any potential interactions.
Okay, good to know. So we've got genes, glutathione, what else? The textbook mentions something about the shape of a drug molecule.
Oh yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
It turns out that even the shape of a drug can influence how it's metabolized.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Well, a lot of drugs come in different forms called enantiomers. Have you heard of those?
Enantiomers? Vaguely. Something about mirror images, right?
Yeah, you got it. Enantiomers are basically mirror images of each other, like your left and right hand.
Okay, I remember that from chemistry class.
And even though they're made of the same atoms, those tiny structural differences can have a big impact on how they interact with the body.
You're kidding.
No, seriously. The textbook gives the example of the thyroid hormones. The natural form is called L-thyroxine,
L-thyroxine, okay.
but there's also a mirror image form called D-thyroxine.
Thyroxine.
Right. And it turns out that D-thyroxine can actually lower cholesterol, but it doesn't have the same metabolic effects as the natural L form.
So even though they're made of the same stuff, their shape determines how they're treated by the body.
It's incredible, right?
Huh.
And the textbook goes on to talk about how this concept of shape applies to specific parts of a molecule as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's called regioselectivity, where enzymes target very specific regions for modification.
Regioselectivity.
It's all about precision. Like
Well-
those enzymes are tiny surgeons operating on those drug molecules with incredible accuracy.
Wow, this is blowing my mind a little bit. Okay, so I've got these enzymes breaking down drugs in specific ways. We've got our genes influencing how quickly that happens. And now the shape of the molecule matters too.
It's a whole symphony of factors.
And I'm guessing this makes drug development super complicated.
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive challenge to figure out how a new drug will behave in the body, especially when you consider that different species metabolize drugs differently.
Oh, right, of course.
Like the textbook gives the example of amphetamine, which is mainly hydroxylated in rats, but deaminated in humans and dogs.
Wow, so you can't just test a drug on animals and assume it'll work the same way in humans.
No way. That's why scientists are always looking for new and better ways to predict how a drug will behave in humans. There's a growing trend toward in vitro testing, which uses human liver cells in the lab.
In vitro testing. Okay, so kind of like a mini liver in a dish.
Exactly. It allows scientists to get a more accurate picture of how a drug might be metabolized without relying on animal models.
That sounds promising. But even with those advancements, I'm guessing it's still pretty difficult to predict how different drugs will interact with each other in the body.
You're right, drug interactions are a huge concern. It's like a delicate balancing act, trying to figure out how all these different medications will affect each other's metabolism.
Okay, so how do they even begin to figure that out?
Well, it starts with understanding those enzymes and transporters we talked about. Remember how those enzymes can be induced or inhibited?
Right, like speeding up or slowing down the metabolism of a drug?
Exactly. Well, when you take multiple medications, they can often interfere with each other's metabolism, either through enzyme induction or inhibition.
So it's like a drug traffic jam in the liver.
Uh-huh. That's a great analogy.
Uh-huh.
And those traffic jams can have a big impact on a medication's effectiveness and safety.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. The textbook talks about lovastatin, a drug used to lower cholesterol.
Okay.
It's metabolized by this enzyme called CYP3A. But if someone takes lovastatin, along with a drug that inhibits CYP3A, like ketoconazole or cyclosporine, well, they'll compete for the same enzyme, and that can lead to higher levels of lovastatin in the system.
So even if someone's taking the prescribed dose, they could end up with too much of the drug in their system.
That's right. It's a major concern, and it's why it's so important to talk to your doctor or pharmacist about all the medications you're taking, even over-the-counter ones.
Okay, so check for those interactions. What about food? I've heard that certain foods can interfere with medications. Does the textbook mention anything about that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The classic example is grapefruit juice.
Ah, right, the grapefruit juice warning. But what's the science behind that?
Well, grapefruit juice contains compounds that can inhibit CYP3A4, one of those key enzymes we've been talking about.
CYT3A4, right?
Yeah, and this inhibition can affect the metabolism of many different drugs, potentially leading to higher levels in the bloodstream.
So grapefruit juice is basically acting like a drug itself, messing with how other medications are broken down.
You could say that. It's a great example of how even seemingly harmless things can have a big impact on drug metabolism.
Wow, okay. Grapefruit juice is officially off the menu when I'm taking medications. This is all so fascinating, but it's also a little overwhelming.
I know, right? It really makes you realize how complex this whole process is.
Right.
But the more we understand, the better we can manage our medications and stay healthy.
Well said. I think you've given our listeners a lot to digest. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the liver's role in drug metabolism to those fascinating transporter proteins and the importance of individual variations.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. And we've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much to explore.
Okay, I'm ready for more. But first, let's take a quick break and then come back to discuss how all of this amazing complexity ties into the exciting world of personalized medicine.
Sounds good to me.
So we explored how the liver tackles those drugs we take.
Yeah, it's amazing what that organ can do.
But I'm thinking the liver's not alone in this cleanup mission. The kidneys play a big role too, right?
Absolutely. The kidneys are essential for filtering waste products from the blood. It's not just like a simple sieve, though.
Oh, I was picturing something like that.
The text describes a multi-step process, actually. Way more intricate than you'd think.
So how does it actually work?
Well, the first step is called glomerular filtration. It involves these tiny bundles of capillaries called glomeruli.
Glomeruli, okay.
And they act like a high-pressure system, basically forcing fluid and small molecules out of the blood.
So squeezing out the impurities, I guess.
You could say that. And this filtered fluid then flows into these little tubes called nephrons.
Nephrons, right. So is everything just dumped out of the body at this point?
Not quite. The nephrons have a very important job. Reabsorption.
Reabsorption.
Yeah, essential substances like water, glucose, and electrolytes are reabsorbed back into the bloodstream.
So it's a filter, but also a recycling system.
Exactly. The kidneys are constantly fine-tuning that balance to keep everything in check.
Fascinating. And I'm guessing this is where drug elimination comes in.
You got it. The kidneys can get rid of drugs in a couple of ways. Some drugs are small enough to be filtered out to the glomerulus, just like those waste products.
Okay.
But if a drug is lipophilic, meaning it likes to dissolve in fats, it can actually sneak back into the bloodstream through those nephron walls.
So some drugs are like escape artists.
You could say that. But the body has a way to catch them. It's called active tubular secretion.
Active tubular secretion. What's that?
Well, the kidneys have these specialized transporter proteins,
Right, we talked about this before.
and they can grab onto certain drugs from the bloodstream and pump them into those nephron tubules.
So it's like a targeted removal system just for certain drugs?
Exactly. It's a
Okay.
pretty efficient process, even for drugs that are bound to proteins in the blood.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this filtering, reabsorbing, and active secretion happening in the kidneys. And I remember you mentioned the liver and kidneys working together too.
Oh yeah, it's a total team effort. And just like with liver metabolism, there are certain factors that can influence how well the kidneys excrete drugs.
Makes sense. So what kinds of things can affect renal drug excretion then?
Lots of things. Age is a big one. As we get older, our kidney function tends to decline, which can lead to slower drug clearance.
So older people might need lower doses of certain medication.
Exactly. It's important to adjust dosages based on kidney function.
What else affects it?
Certain medical conditions can impact renal drug excretion too, like kidney disease or diabetes.
Right, if the filters aren't working properly, the drugs might build up.
Exactly. It's a big concern, and it highlights the importance of monitoring kidney function in people taking medications.
Okay, age, medical conditions, anything else?
Well, even something as simple as dehydration can impact how the kidneys function.
Seriously, dehydration can affect drug elimination.
Oh, yeah. Staying hydrated is important for so many reasons.
I guess I never thought about that connection before. It's like a chain reaction.
And of course, those pesky drug interactions can play a role in the kidneys too.
Oh, of course, those.
Some drugs can actually interfere with those transporter proteins, either by blocking them or competing for the same binding sites.
So it's like a battle for those transporter spots.
Huh, you could say that. And the outcome of that battle can impact how quickly drugs are eliminated.
This is really making me think twice about those drug interaction warnings. It's all so intricate, but those transporter proteins, they're not just in the kidneys, right?
Nope, they're all over the body, embedded in those cell membranes.
Wow, so they're playing a much bigger role than I initially realized.
They're essential. They control the movement of so many substances, not just drugs. It's like they're the gatekeepers at every cellular border.
So even after a drug gets absorbed and makes it past the liver, it still has to deal with those transporters at each cell.
Exactly. And they're not just controlling movement in and out of cells either. They also help move drugs between different compartments within the body.
Different compartments, what do you mean?
Think about a drug that needs to get into the brain. To do that, it has to cross the blood-brain barrier.
Right, that's like a protective shield around the brain.
Exactly. It's a tough barrier to get through. And some drugs actually rely on specific transporters to get across.
So it's like a secret passageway into the brain.
Uh-huh. You could say that. It's why understanding these transporter pathways is so important for drug development. Scientists can try to design drugs that can use those pathways to target specific areas more effectively.
It's like building a drug with a GPS system. Incredible.
It really is. And it's not just about getting drugs to the right places. Transporters also help prevent drug accumulation in sensitive tissues.
Oh, how do they do that?
Well, some transporters act as efflux pumps, basically pumping drugs out of cells. Remember PGP, the transporter we talked about earlier?
One that can pump drugs back into the intestines?
Exactly. Well, it's found in many tissues, including the brain, the liver, the kidneys, even the placenta.
So it's working hard to protect those sensitive areas.
You got it. It's constantly on patrol, keeping things balanced.
Wow, so we've got absorption, distribution, metabolism, and elimination, all influenced by these transporter proteins. This is definitely making me think about medication in a whole new light.
I think that's the beauty of digging into this stuff, isn't it?
It really is. It's amazing how much complexity is hidden within something as seemingly simple as taking a pill.
Absolutely. And what's really important to remember is that drug elimination is a dynamic process. It's not one size fits all.
Right, we talked about those individual variations.
Exactly. Factors like age, genetics, diet, other medications, they can all play a role in how quickly and effectively a drug is eliminated from the body.
So our bodies are really active participants in this whole process. It's a partnership, not just us passively receiving the medication.
Well said. And I think that understanding is key for making sure that those medications are working as intended.
Okay, so we've gone from the liver to the kidneys to transporter proteins, from enzymes to genes. We've really traveled through this hidden world of drug elimination.
It's been quite a journey.
Now I'm even more excited to see how this all connects to the future of personalized medicine. All right, so we've really explored this whole world of drug elimination, from the liver to the kidneys, those transporter proteins.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It is, and now I'm really excited to talk about how all of this ties into personalized medicine.
Me too. It's such an exciting field. It's all about recognizing that we each have our own unique way of processing medications.
Right, so it's not just about the drug itself, it's about how you metabolize it, how your body handles it.
Exactly. And that can depend on so many things. Your genes, those enzymes we talked about, your diet, even your gut microbiome can play a role.
It's mind-boggling. So how are we actually using this knowledge to improve healthcare?
Well, the ultimate goal is to be able to predict how someone will respond to a medication based on all these individual factors. Like, imagine
Yeah.
being able to tailor dosages, choose the best medication for each person, and even anticipate side effects before they happen.
That sounds like science fiction.
I know, right? But it's becoming more and more of a reality. We're already seeing glimpses of it in practice.
Really? Like how?
Well, remember we talked about slow and fast acetylators?
Yeah, those genetic variations.
Exactly. Doctors can actually use genetic testing now to figure out someone's acetylation status
Okay.
and then adjust the dosage of certain medications accordingly, especially for drugs that can be problematic for slow acetylators,
Mm.
like isoniazid.
Right, the tuberculosis drug.
Yep. So that's one example of how personalized medicine is already being used.
That's amazing. And what about those transporter proteins? Are they playing a role in personalized medicine too?
Oh, absolutely. Scientists are doing a lot of research on how to use transporter information to optimize drug delivery and minimize side effects.
So what are they doing exactly?
Well, one approach is to design drugs that can actually target specific transporters
Oh, wow.
so they can be delivered more efficiently to the tissues where they're needed.
It's like giving those medications their own GPS systems. Uh-huh. That's a great way to put it. And researchers are also looking at ways to modulate transporter activity to help get rid of drugs faster in cases of toxicity.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's all about fine-tuning those natural cleanup mechanisms to make treatment more personalized and effective.
This is all so exciting, but are there any challenges to making this vision of personalized medicine a reality?
Oh, for sure. There are definitely still some hurdles to overcome. One of the biggest challenges is access to genetic testing.
Right, and interpreting those results can be tricky too.
Exactly. We need more comprehensive databases and better guidelines to help doctors translate that genetic information into practical treatment decisions.
So it's not just about the technology, it's about having the infrastructure and the expertise to use it effectively.
Exactly. And then there are the ethical considerations too, of course,
Right.
like patient privacy and making sure that genetic information isn't used to discriminate against people.
Right, those are important issues to address. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even with those challenges, the potential of personalized medicine is immense. I mean, just imagine a future where we can predict and prevent adverse drug reactions,
Yeah.
optimize dosages with incredible accuracy, and even develop therapies that are tailored to each person's unique genetic makeup.
It's an incredible vision, and this whole deep dive into drug elimination has really opened my eyes to how much is happening behind the scenes to make that vision a reality.
I agree. It's like we've been exploring the inner workings of this amazing machine, and now we're starting to understand how to fine-tune it for optimal performance.
Well said. So where do we go from here? What's next in the world of biopharmaceutics and personalized medicine?
The research is constantly evolving, and we're learning more every day about how our bodies interact with medications. I think the future is bright.
I agree. This has been an incredible journey. I feel like I've learned so much about how drugs work and how personalized medicine is changing the future of healthcare.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the deep dive.
So to all our listeners out there, stay curious, learn more about your own health, and keep those brains buzzing. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.